Cashless are going to come, and a lot of people in this room are going to be very helpful in educating them and helping them achieve some financial freedom. On that note, welcome to the world's first ever session on central bank digital currencies at a human rights conference, ever. And I think that's kind of crazy because I don't know, to me it's a very straightforward tool of control and surveillance, but they're often presented in the mainstream media as something that we need or something very important, and they're going to be rolled out in dozens and dozens of countries all over the world. And of course they started in China, where the CCP rolled out its pilot. So to discuss this idea of where we might go in a society where we might not have cash anymore, where governments distribute to people liabilities from the central bank instead in the form of digital credits that are in your wallet that can be frozen, confiscated, and socially engineered. We have an all-star panel. My friend Matt is a privacy advocate, a podcast host, and really just someone who inspired a lot of people over the last half decade or more in terms of trying to seek freedom and achieve it for themselves. Lisa works at Blockstream. She's a lightning engineer and also a privacy advocate. Then we have Janine, who is a prolific writer, who writes an awesome blog about Bitcoin privacy, so it'd be great to have her here. She also writes a lot about financial surveillance. And then Matthew is sort of a scholar on central banks and on fiat money, and he studies the issuance of it and how it works. So I couldn't think of a better group here to get you guys started. So here's your, who wants to, Janine's gonna click? Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Alex, for the kind introduction. Today we'll be talking about CBDCs. It's a horrible acronym that I don't expect to last, even though CBDCs will probably be in our future. It stands for Central Bank Digital Currencies, government-issued digital money. So we're going to start with, Matt's going to give us a little introduction to what we can expect from CBDCs. I really hate that acronym.
You can say so-called CBDCs.
So-called CBDCs.
Alex?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Right button? Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I picked the worst contrasting green there for you. But really quickly, try to boil down the world's money in like 2 to 3 minutes. This is a graph of the printing press. We as Bitcoiners all the time talk about the printing press. What is it? What does it mean? Central banks are all the time printing money. I've actually, over 6 years, painfully gone through like 50 central bank balance sheets and put it together. You actually won't find this anywhere else. Not like trying to puff my chest out, just saying the central bank websites are the worst websites you could possibly visit. Very painful, like 1995 style websites. So that's where you find the current currency in the world. Very quickly, there's 2 sort of components of what you call the monetary base or central bank money today. One is bank reserves, or as I say there, wholesale cash, that's the lighter green. The other is physical currency, everything you know and love or hate in your cash, in your wallet, cash, coin, dollars, euros, yen, everything there. So that's retail cash or physical currency. So the banks basically get access to the light portion, we get access retail to the dark green portion. In total, it's $30 trillion, just so you know. And that's cash money, $30 trillion. That's not like Elon Musk, borrowing on Tesla shares to buy Twitter. That's actual cash money. And the retail portion, which is like, the actual hard cash, is $9.2 trillion. That's the dark portion. So that right there would be exactly the component of what central banks print that CBDCs would fall under. That's what it would eat into, is this digital currency. And just really quickly, question for anybody, notice this chart, whether it's the light portion or the dark portion. Anybody notice anything about the chart? It's going up or down. Yeah, number is actually going up, and it's going up strongly, okay? It grows at 1% per month, which is actually 13% compounded annually, which is massive. Remember, they say prices increase at 1 and 2%. So it grows massively. I'm going to jump a little bit to the conclusion just for, as I look at this, CBDCs are going to have a very very tough time getting adopted because the retail cash component of our society is massive, as you see. So yes, we have the Brazilian Central Bank as a proto-CBDC. We have China, of course, famously with the Beijing Olympics, Bahamas, some other countries, but those are very, very small amounts that are not at all close to eating into that. But of course, if it does, it's very dangerous. So that's what we'll talk about today.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. So Matt puts these out in threads every quarter, right? Every quarter?
Yeah, every quarter.
So follow him on Twitter if you want more of that. So right now, when you talk about financial privacy, pretty much the number one rule, even among Bitcoiners, is that if you want privacy, you should use cash, use physical cash. And the reason is because you have default privacy. If you spend cash at a store, there's no way for that store owner to know how much cash you have, what the history of that cash is, what your other transactions are. So you have this nice default privacy. With CBDCs, the play is pretty much the exact opposite of that. It's a currency that is very easy to surveil. Janine, you want to talk about what the implications of that could be on our society?
Yeah, so I basically have two main arguments about CBDCs. The main one is that I think that when we're talking about digital currency, at least personally, as someone who cares about privacy and
I don't think the mics are working.
Go for it now.
as someone who cares about privacy and protecting against censorship, whenever I'm evaluating any digital currency or any kind of money really, even if it's not digital, I look at whether it passes what I call the WikiLeaks test, which is if you have an organization that is being targeted by, for example, a nation state, or in that case specifically a group of nation states, because they are using their speech rights in a way that they do not agree with, the states do not agree with, then those states may attempt to stop them by seizing their money, blocking them from receiving any money, or blocking individuals from being able to send them money. And so any kind of money system where that's possible, regardless of what your opinion is on a particular organization, I feel like it's important to have a monetary system where it passes that test. And that's why it's actually the central reason I got interested in Bitcoin, is because it passes that test since 2011. It's been passing that test even at a time where it's relatively small. So I would expect any kind of CBDC to pass that test, and if it doesn't, I say I'm not interested. The second thing that I would argue is that in terms of the global financial system, I think that any kind of CBDC, especially one that comes out of the United States and its allies, is probably going to be used as part of the goal of what they term unconventional warfare. There's actually a document that was published in 2008 by the U.S. military where essentially they list off a bunch of organizations that are involved in this. They say participation in international financial orgs such as the World Bank, IMF, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and the Bank for International Settlements offers the U.S. diplomatic financial venues to accomplish such coalitions. Like all other instruments of U.S. national power, the use and effects of financial weapons are interrelated and they must be coordinated carefully. And so all of those organizations I just listed are currently key leading players in kind of the discussion of what to do about CBDCs, how to design them, whether they should have privacy, where should they have privacy. And I think that we have to acknowledge this political element that's involved. There was also a publication of a paper from the Bank of International Settlements this year, and one of the banks that submitted an opinion, which was, I think, the Bank of Israel, they actually warned that the design decisions of major economies, as they termed it, they didn't list many, but I assume they meant the United States, the European Union, Russia, China. Their decisions would impact the design decisions of CBDCs in smaller nations. And so that meant if the U.S. didn't want privacy, the European Union didn't want privacy, they made it easy to censor transactions, then smaller countries would have to do so also, or they would be at risk of being cut off from the interoperability agreements of these CBDCs because they want them to be able to work together. So they can use that as a tool to pressure smaller countries to adopt policies that maybe they actually don't agree with as a nation. So I think that's a big risk.
Awesome, thank you, Janine. before we continue, the main point of this panel is to talk about central bank digital currencies. We will be having another panel at 4 that will be talking about Bitcoin privacy, best practices in general. So if anyone is interested in that, make sure you come back. But Lisa, I mean, you're obviously a prolific Lightning developer. You do a lot of education in the Lightning developer space. How do you view the work in terms of trying to create an alternative for people in a central bank digital currency future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, so when I'm thinking about like, monetary systems and like, CBDCs are definitely, I think, one thing that we're going to start seeing in the future. And what I really like about Lightning is I think that it's let me back up a little bit. So I think one thing that we're kind of talking about here is permission, right? So the problem with, and it's not just CBDCs I think that fall into this. I think Janine was kind of talking about like your ability to, I don't know if you mentioned like the warfare, kind of like the unconditional war by like controlling where people are allowed to spend their money. It kind of all comes back to permission, and to some extent, when you have cash, whose permission do you need in order to hand that to someone else? Well, you don't have to ask anyone's permission. It's they call it like a bearer instrument, right? That means the value of the object is in the object itself. By giving the object to another person, you've transferred that value to someone else. You don't have to ask permission from anyone to do that. Currently, if you keep your money in another institution, like a bank, or you use a credit card to transact with, suddenly you need permission from someone else in order to effect a value transfer. So you either need permission from your bank to move money from your account to someone else's, because they're the ones that are going to be making that value trade, or you need permission from a credit card company for them to pay on your behalf to a vendor. So I would say that this move away from cash and kind of move into a cashless society. So a lot of businesses here won't even accept cash. We're already dealing with these issues of permission, and whether or not you have permission to transact with whatever amount of value that your account says you have, right? If you have to ask someone else for the permission to use value that is in theory yours, at some extent it's like, okay, well, how much is that really value that you have control over, right? And this is, I kind of want to plug this book. I think this book, Cash Money by Brett Scott, I just got an advanced copy of, I think is a really interesting kind of look at what are the implications of moving away from cash. So what does it mean to move into cashless societies? He talks about Bitcoin and stuff. But anyways, so is that something you're interested in? I think this is probably an interesting kind of more high-level overview of it. Sorry if I'm too long. Okay, cool. So CBDCs are, I think, kind of on the scale of permission to transact. The thing with CBDCs is that it's an initiative by central banks to move away from paper money, which is hard. It's got a lot of logistics around it if you're transacting with paper. It's, there's a whole pipeline of how do you get cash to people who need it in a physical sense to transact with it. If you can move that onto a digital system, such as, essentially processed, I don't know how to explain, a digital currency, right? So from paper cash to digital currency, it's cheaper for the states. There's a lot of reasons that they want to move from a cash system to a digital system. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of CBDC stuff from. It also makes it a lot easier to track who's using the money. That C in the CBDC stands for centralized, right? So that means that there's a central processor that's going to be seeing every transaction that gets made in this bank currency thing will have to go through a central processor, which at that opportunity has an opportunity basically to decide whether or not that's a transaction or a value exchange that they want to permit, right? So we talked about permission there. So the cool thing about Bitcoin, and I work on Lightning, these are very decentralized systems, or they aim to be super decentralized. So the whole point of having decentralized systems is that how many people, the permission then, who are you getting permission from to transact, you bring that back to the control of the individual that's holding the coins, right? So Bitcoin is really cool, and Lightning is a little more complicated, but I think is and we'll talk about privacy later at 4 o'clock. I think that here.
4 o'clock right here.
4 o'clock here. So we'll talk
We're
about.
gonna do workshops there at 3.
Okay.
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock back here. But we start getting into Bitcoin and Lightning. layer 2, which is kind of a whole different crypto thing. I don't have to get into the specifics of that. But it's super decentralized, and it starts to like, so who do you need permission to transact with Bitcoin? Who do you need permission from to transact with Lightning? And the answer starts to be like, no one if you're doing it yourself, right? There are tools then. We now have the tools and we have the capability of holding value for yourself, so you don't have to have anyone's permission to hold the value, and then you don't need anyone's permission to transfer that value to someone else. So it's really cool because it's a digital system, and you get the instantaneousness, you know, within a certain boundary. You get the global reach you have with these, like, you know, it's internet money. It's like online, you can send it, you can hold it using digital systems, but it's still decentralized, and the permission is basically like located in the keys you hold for it.
Thanks, Lisa.
Sorry.
I mean, I think the key point you made there, where it's permission versus no permission. That's the key difference, and what a lot of people mistake, especially if they're entering Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies for the first time, is they think maybe CBDCs compete with Bitcoin. They're fundamentally different. So first off, I'm curious, raise your hand if you've used Bitcoin. You got a full Bitcoin user. Okay, now this question I'm more curious about. Raise your hand if when you spend your local currency, your local fiat, you normally spend more cash than a digital money alternative. More cash than credit card or payment app. So see, you guys are already all on a digital money standard. It's just
Let me follow up with that.
separated. Yeah, I'm
Because,
curious on your
yeah, like,
opinion.
and Lisa was saying this too, I mean, all of your credit cards, debit cards, bank, money transfers, SEPA, SWIFT, whatever, that is all a function of the banking system, which is on top of this chart, so everything on top of it, and that's all called, at the end of the day, fiduciary media. It's a fiduciary that runs it, so it is permissioned, absolutely. In my opinion, it'd be much better if you didn't have a central banking system, but we do. So, but the thing is, even in this system, you have the ability to withdraw your cash at an ATM or a bank, and it's clunky, but you can withdraw. And with that instrument, which is, you know, a 1,000-year-old instrument, you can move it around. You know, you can protect your family, fuel, food, move across borders if you need to. You can do a lot of things with it. If that goes away, it becomes an extremely dangerous world, especially if you want to go above the family level to like a dissidence level or anything. You can't do that anymore. Of course, we have Bitcoin, thank God, because Bitcoin is economically analogous to this money supply, as is gold and silver, but they're not really money anymore, but still, you can trade jewelry and stuff if you want. It's done in India and China all the time. You can do it with gold and silver, you can do it with Bitcoin, or you can do it with fiat cash. So their goal is to get rid of fiat cash. One more thing, which actually, again, as I said before, jumping to the conclusion, we have one thing that's in favor of this, and every central bank knows this, and every research paper on CBDC says this, is that if we start to have the banking system think that, oh, it's just cool to have this CBDC, you know, it works better than cash, it works better than my credit card, it works better than PayPal, or whatever, and we start to drain the banking system of deposits, and people don't hold deposits, but they start holding CBDCs with the central bank, that's actually horrible for the banking system's profitability. And central banks are definitely socialists and they like bailouts, but they're not communists. Like, they like to make money, they like to be there to protect the bankers. So they know that if you drain deposits from the banks and it only goes into a central bank CBDC currency that can't be loaned upon, can't be lent out, then that's a problem for the banking system. So they're trying to figure that out right now. The common solution is that there'll be limits, maybe $1,000 equivalent to every CBDC. They're trying to figure these things out. It's going to be clunky. In my opinion, it's going to take years and years and years. The only country right now that has the ability to maybe leapfrog against some of these problems or over some of these problems is a communist country like China, which is huge, it's a juggernaut, and they're already planning it. So that's a big danger. So these are kind of that's the landscape of what's happening right now with CBDCs.
So, I mean, thanks, Matt. So there's two pressures going on here right now, right? So governments want to reduce cash usage, but as you can see from the show of hands here, there's like 3 people in this room that use cash still. There's a push from consumers to move into digital money. So consumers are using these payment apps, they're using credit cards already. They have some of the same negatives that a potential central bank digital currency have, but a central bank digital currency takes it a step further. Janine, do you have any insight there on like what can we expect as we move to to this, more centralized system. Just imagine that it's quick.
That's right.
We have 8 more
Yeah,
minutes.
I think the biggest reason, I mean, I sympathize with people who, I sympathize to a degree with people who have already basically given out cash sort of voluntarily, but I think that the main reason that that's happened is because, most people don't understand the cost of that, because the system deliberately tries to hide the cost from you, especially with credit cards, like the whole, credit system, the only reason it works is because they all have to surveil you to a very extensive degree. There's actually a really great book called Credit Worthy, and it basically shows how the financial surveillance system basically started with the development of the credit system, and how that's like really accelerated, especially in recent decades. And so I think that the costs are hidden from people, and without being able to see the costs, then you can't make accurate decisions. And I would make a similar comparison to, for example, journalistic work, like with Julian Assange. Part of what his work was to give proof of the cost of war. A lot of people were voting in favor of wars, supporting politicians who were in favor of wars because they didn't understand the cost of that. And because he exposed the cost of that, it obviously made a bunch of people very angry. And I think a similar thing would happen if someone was to fully expose the credit system and how much surveillance that relies on to function.
Thanks, Janine. Lisa, do you think there's a lesson to be learned here about people voluntarily not using cash that like Bitcoiners should consider when we're moving into a CBDC future, or is it not analogous?
A lesson about, I'm sorry, could you?
Like, why don't people use cash? Like, I just don't understand. Like, why have people moved fully, pretty much, to these digital payment apps?
I mean, from my perspective, I can talk about why I use.
Do you use cash primarily?
No, I use mostly
So why?
online systems. Yeah, it's convenient. Like, it's a convenience thing, right? It's like, and it's so easy to like set something online, and I can like, I don't know, I can just use my phone. I can like type things into my phone. I can send people money using my phone. I don't have to keep track of, and this is actually like one of the reasons that I spent a decent amount of time kind of just looking into the history of credit card networks. One of the things about a credit card that's so awesome as like a consumer is you no longer need to know how much money do I need before I go out of the house, right? Like you don't have to do any planning. You
It's
just
just
your credit
borrow
card.
it at 20%.
Yeah, exactly. I'll pay it back before they start charging me money. It'll be fine. But I don't have to figure out like if I'm gonna go on a trip or something. I don't have to know I'm gonna need like $100 for the hotel or whatever, right? Or how much am I gonna spend on drinks tonight? And so I think that's why a lot of people have moved over to like credit cards, especially Americans, or like any kind of digital system, right? Because you no longer have to worry about how many credits that I'm carrying with me physically. It's just like, it's really more convenient. And I think that if you wanted me to maybe to tie this back into Bitcoin,
I mean, the lesson should be that we need Bitcoin to be more convenient.
We need Bitcoin
Otherwise,
to be
everyone's going to use
convenient.
the slave money.
yeah, everyone's gonna use the slave money, that's right, or permission money maybe, like, so I think, as we move into Bitcoin as like builders and people that are working on the system and the interfaces really, right, it's how many steps, one way of looking at digital interfaces and interface design is like, how many steps does it take to accomplish a task, right? And so, people that are good at designing interfaces will take that into account. So the number of steps you need to take with any particular piece of software will be very short, right? Because they'll figure out what you want to do and they'll make it very easy. So as designers of Bitcoin systems, making better, user experiences, which means like less steps to do the things we want to do, I think is a very important thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you just have to have cash in a free society. I mean, it's a basic point to say, but
Cash is fine.
if you don't have cash, no, I mean, digital cash is fine.
Okay.
The digital cash, remember, Bitcoin is analogous. That chart I was showing, Bitcoin is completely analogous to what I was showing you, the monetary base, which is the cash system that the state took over the last few hundred years. But you have to have cash, even if it's this fiat cash at the moment, and you're in, like I said, trying to get your family across the border, you have to have cash. Otherwise, you are at total risk of being under the surveillance state, the panopticon, all the rest. So, at the moment, if we do go towards this CBDC route, which is, again, going to be a disaster for the financial system, China will lead it. But still, the only other alternative is going to be Bitcoin. It's the exact same economic
Hold on,
properties. So when I say cash, it can be digital
I got
cash.
a question there. So Matt, right at the start, you said that cash is the best tool to avoid financial surveillance.
Correct,
Because it's default privacy, right?
correct.
So are you saying that CBDCs aren't default privacy, and Bitcoin is?
My expectation, and I'm curious on Matt's opinion here, is that the central bank digital currencies will call themselves digital cash. They will give you privacy on the surface, so if I spend money, if I pay Lisa can't see my finances, but who's ever administering the currency will have all-seeing power on the backside, and they will say it's to stop terrorism, to stop criminals, to stop drugs, to stop child predators. That will be the claim, and that's how they will execute it, and most people will just turn a blind eye and be completely fine with it, because it'll be more convenient. Maybe they'll get some bonus, they'll get UBI, throw some UBI in there.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, by
pops
default.
in right into your account, you wake up in the morning, oh nice, I got some more money.
Yeah, by default, there is no privacy in a CBDC, because,
Sorry,
think about it,
what about, so Bitcoin is default privacy?
No.
it's, Bitcoin is.
Come back at 4.
Yeah, you have to, that's,
So Bitcoin is
but
not
Bitcoin,
default
but
privacy.
Bitcoin is by default basic money, which compares 100% for what we're talking about CBDC.
It's permissionless, right?
Yeah.
We go back to the permission stuff, right? When you're using someone else's, like, when you're using a central bank's currency, you're going to be asking permission from their system to transfer value. When you're using a permissionless system like Bitcoin, and the privacy thing, again, I think is a whole nother spectrum within an extent of trackability. But if someone can track, I think there's a difference between being able to be tracked versus being able to actually like effectuate the exchange of value, right? And that's the permissionlessness, which is super core to Bitcoin in this school.
But it's even one level worse than what we're talking about with everything Visa, MasterCard. Like Visa, MasterCard can see things, they're major networks, whatever. But if the goal of CBDCs is to have an eye on every single user, whether you're a retail, whether you're a business, whether you're a hotel, you can have an eye on absolutely everything. And if you want to say, okay, if you spend too much on alcohol this week, we turn you off, or they can time limit your spend, so they can give negative interest rates with it. They can say you got to spend by this date. All of those things are their goal with CBDCs. Which, by the way, that's nothing to do with blockchain or anything. It's just a
They've actually, a lot of countries, the same Bank of International Settlements paper that I cited, that had over, I think, 2 dozen countries that submitted basically what their plans were. And most of them said, we can maybe have privacy between the consumer and the payment processor, but at every other stage in the system, they said literally there cannot be privacy. The European Union has said the same thing. They said, at best, we can maybe do privacy for low value, local transactions that they consider low risk, which who knows how they come to that determination, but they have already told us that they don't want privacy.
Awesome. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you guys. We're out of time. And I want to thank HRF for hosting this conversation.